March 9, 2016. A husband gets a call no man should ever receive. A fatal crash. A body burned beyond recognition. A wife lost forever, or so he thought. The fire was too intense. There were no remains to identify, just a charred skeleton, a scorched wedding ring, and a necklace she never took off. That's all they needed to declare her gone. Case closed. No further questions. Except they should have asked one. Because 7 years later, she wasn't just alive. She was happy. She was in love. And she was holding hands with his best friend. Imagine carrying grief for 7 years, raising a daughter alone, believing your world had shattered, only to discover it was all a lie. What would you do? Would you walk away? Or would you make them pay? Welcome to True Crime Vault, your go-to source for captivating crime stories, unsolved mysteries, and gripping investigations. A huge thank you to my amazing viewers and subscribers for your support. Keep tuning in for daily updates on true crime tales, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated. Some people are born into comfort, others into struggle. Darius Montgomery was one of the latter. Born on May 17, 1988, in Detroit, Michigan, Darius grew up knowing one thing: life doesn't give, it takes. His mother, Angela Montgomery, worked double shifts at a nursing home, barely making ends meet. His father, just another name on a birth certificate, gone before Darius was old enough to ask why. The east side of Detroit wasn't kind to kids like him. Crime, poverty, a revolving door of broken promises. He saw it all. He learned early that survival wasn't just about luck. It was about discipline, focus, and the will to never become another statistic. Darius wasn't the loudest kid in school. He wasn't the troublemaker, the class clown, or the dreamer. He was the observer, the quiet one, the boy who knew that in a world built to break him, his only weapon was his mind. Books became his escape. Numbers made sense when nothing else did. While his classmates got lost in the streets, he buried himself in math. Equations, structures, the science of building something that lasts. Engineering became his obsession. And then, in August of 2005, when Hurricane Katrina ripped through the South and left thousands homeless, Darius knew what he wanted to do with his life. He would become a civil engineer. He would build things that couldn't be broken. He would create safety in a world full of chaos. By 2006, he had done what most kids from his neighborhood never did: graduated with honors from King High School. And when he earned a full scholarship to Michigan State University for civil engineering, he left Detroit behind, determined to create a future that no one could take away from him. Darius Montgomery was a man of discipline, a man who believed in hard work, loyalty, and family. But life had other plans. Because years later, after all the sacrifices, after all the nights spent chasing dreams instead of sleep, he would come to learn the cruelest lesson of all. Sometimes, no matter how much you build, no matter how strong you think your foundation is, they say opposites attract, that sometimes the universe brings together two people who have no business being in the same orbit, and yet, somehow, they fit. For Darius Montgomery, that person was Noel Carter. It was 2009, his third year at Michigan State. He had spent the past 2 years buried in textbooks, calculating steel structures and soil foundations. His world was numbers, logic, precision. And then, one full afternoon, in a crowded student union cafe, logic failed him for the first time. She was there, bold, laughing, commanding attention without even trying. Noel Carter, a journalism major with a sharp tongue and an even sharper mind. She was the type of woman who didn't just step into a room. She took it. Where Darius was quiet, Noel was loud. Where he calculated every move, she lived in the moment. She was a storm in a world he had spent his life trying to structure. And yet, he wanted nothing more than to be caught in it. They started as friends. Study sessions turned into coffee dates. Coffee dates turned into long midnight talks about life, dreams, and the kind of love that doesn't burn fast and disappear, but stays. By 2013, they were married. It wasn't grand, just a small ceremony in Detroit, close friends, and a courthouse kiss that tasted like forever. 2 years later, their daughter, Ava Montgomery, was born, June 3rd, 2015, the day Darius learned that love had no limits. She had his eyes, his quiet intensity, but she had her mother's fire. She was a perfect mix, the proof that maybe the world could be both structured and wild, both calculated and unpredictable. For the first time, Darius had everything: a career in civil engineering, a wife who made life electric, a daughter who made his world whole. But love is never perfect. Darius worked long hours, late nights at the firm, meetings that turned into missed dinners. Noel's career in journalism was thriving, but with it came distance, assignments, deadlines, the chase of the next big story. They fought about schedules, about Ava, about the space that had begun to grow between them like a hairline crack in a foundation, too small to notice at first, until it was too deep to repair. Still, he trusted her, always, because Noel wasn't just his wife. She was his anchor, his forever. And in the end, that trust would be the thing that destroyed him. Loyalty is a rare thing. Some people claim to have it, but when the moment comes, they prove otherwise. And for Darius Montgomery, that moment came in the form of his best friend, Jordan Ellis. They met in the 5th grade. 2 kids from the same streets, growing up in the same struggle. Darius was a quiet one, always thinking 5 steps ahead. Jordan, he didn't plan. He moved. He talked fast, smiled quicker, and had a way of making the world bend to his will. Where Darius saw life as a blueprint, Jordan treated it like a game. He could talk his way into anything, and out of everything. It was a gift, a dangerous one. But despite their differences, they were inseparable, brothers in everything but blood. As they grew older, their paths started to split. Darius went the route of hard work, books, degrees, a future built on stability. Jordan, he chased shortcuts, fast money, flipping cars, dealing with the right people until the wrong people got involved. There were moments, small ones, where Darius saw it coming. The way Jordan could lie without blinking. The way he always knew exactly what to say to get what he wanted. But Darius believed in loyalty. And loyalty meant trust. Even when Jordan started spending more time at his house. Even when Noel laughed a little too easily at his jokes. Even when he caught them exchanging glances that lingered a second too long. He ignored the signs, because Jordan was family, and Noel was his wife. They would never betray him. At least, that's what he told himself. March 9th, 2016, 11:42 p.m. The phone rang. Darius Montgomery barely looked at the screen before answering. He had been working late, another long shift, another deadline, but the moment he heard the voice on the other end, the air left his lungs. "Is this Mr. Montgomery?" The officer's voice was clinical, empty, the kind of tone that only delivers one type of news. "There's been an accident. Fatal collision. Interstate 75, just outside the city. The vehicle was registered to Noel Carter Montgomery." He didn't understand at first. His mind refused to process the words. Fatal. Collision. No survivors. "That's impossible," he muttered. "She's coming home. She should be home." But the officer didn't waver. He kept going, explaining how the fire consumed everything, how the impact had left no chance of survival. By the time Darius arrived at the station, his vision was blurred. He didn't remember the drive, didn't remember stepping inside, but he remembered what they showed him. A wedding ring, blackened from the flames. A necklace, the one she never took off. And nothing else. There was no DNA left to test, no body to identify, just ashes and metal. And that was enough. That was all they needed to declare her gone. March 15th, 2016. The funeral was closed casket. There was nothing to bury, just a box filled with memories that no longer belonged to him. Ava was too young to understand. 3 years old, sitting in his mother's lap, waiting. She kept looking at the door, expecting Noel to walk in, like she always did. "Where's Mommy?" Darius couldn't answer. He couldn't even speak. For months, he stopped existing. He went through the motions. Work, home, sleep. Except there was no sleep. Only silence. Only the empty space in their bed. The untouched coffee cup in the kitchen. The ghost of a life that no longer existed. And through it all, Jordan Ellis was there. He handled the funeral, the paperwork, the things Darius couldn't bring himself to touch. He sat with Ava, made her laugh when Darius couldn't even look at her without breaking. And slowly, without realizing it, Darius let Jordan take control. At first, it felt like support, like brotherhood, but grief makes a man blind. And while Darius was drowning, Jordan was making sure he never saw the truth. Grief doesn't end. It doesn't fade. It doesn't follow the rules people say it does. It just sits there, waiting, a weight on your chest that never really lifts. For Darius Montgomery, grief became routine. It became muscle memory. Wake up, get Ava ready for daycare, go to work, stay late, stay longer, anything to avoid going home. Because home wasn't home anymore. It was just a place where Noel's absence was louder than anything else. His co-workers stopped asking how he was. At first, there were sympathetic glances, quiet condolences. But after a while, people move on. Except he didn't. He buried himself in projects, took on more work than he could handle. Anything to keep his mind from drifting back to the past, to the what-ifs, to the smell of her perfume that still lingered on their bed sheets. But there was one thing he couldn't outrun, one voice that pulled him back every single time. Ava. Every night, she asked the same question. Daddy, when is Mommy coming home? The first time, he choked on his answer. The second time, he just shook his head. By the 10th, he stopped answering altogether. She was only 4 now, too young to understand why her mother was never coming back, but old enough to feel that something was missing, that something was wrong. And she wasn't the only one who changed. Jordan Ellis had been there for everything. Every sleepless night, every hard conversation. He had been the anchor Darius didn't know he needed. Until he wasn't. The texts slowed down. The calls became excuses. The visit stopped altogether. At first, Darius didn't question it. People move on. Grief isn't contagious, but it makes people uncomfortable. And Jordan had always been restless, never one to stay in the same place for too long. But something about it felt off. It wasn't just distance. It was avoidance. The kind that didn't happen naturally. The kind that was intentional. Maybe it was the way Jordan changed the subject every time Noel's name came up. Maybe it was a silence that stretched too long when Darius asked him where he'd been. Maybe it was nothing. But maybe it wasn't. July 15th, 2023. 7 years after the funeral. 7 years of silence, of loneliness, of carrying a loss that never felt real but was too heavy to ignore. Darius Montgomery never took vacations. He never saw the point. But Ava was 10 now, and she had been asking for months. Daddy, can we go somewhere fun? Just us. So, for the first time since Noel's death, he said yes. The Dominican Republic, a resort by the water, something different, something new, a break from the weight of the past. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. Sitting at an outdoor cafe, watching Ava sip a mango smoothie, seeing the way her eyes lit up at the ocean. It was easy, simple. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw him. It was just a glance. A man walking along the shoreline, relaxed, confident, the sun catching his profile just right. Darius almost ignored it, almost dismissed it as a trick of the mind. But something made him look again. Jordan Ellis. It had been years since they last spoke, since Jordan's excuses had turned into full-blown absence. But there he was, laughing, at ease, not a man carrying the weight of lost friendships, but a man who had moved on without a second thought. And then Darius saw her. Noel, alive, standing next to Jordan, her hand in his, her body leaning into him like she belonged there. 7 years of grief, erased in an instant. Darius couldn't breathe. His vision tunneled, hands clenching against the table so hard his knuckles turned white. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs, a slow, suffocating roar in his ears. He wanted to blink, to shake his head, to wake up from whatever cruel trick his mind was playing on him. But it wasn't a trick. She was there, smiling, wearing a sundress that caught the breeze just right, looking every bit like the woman he had buried. For 7 years, he had mourned her. For 7 years, he had suffered. And for 7 years, she had been here, living. The realization hit slow, like poison seeping into his bloodstream. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some impossible coincidence. This had been planned. They had done this to him. Together. Darius didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, he watched. He followed. He became the shadow in their paradise. Breakfast at a beachfront restaurant. Walks along the shore. Private moments stolen in the spaces between tourists, where she laughed at something Jordan said, her hand trailing across his arm like muscle memory. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't hiding. Because she never thought she had to. Because she believed Darius was still drowning in the lie they created. But she was wrong. Because now he knew the truth. And the only thing left was deciding what to do with it. Darius Montgomery had always been a man of logic, a man who thought before he acted, who planned before he moved. And now, standing on the edge of a truth he never asked for, he did what he had always done. He calculated. He watched. He waited. For the next 2 days, Darius became invisible, a ghost in the background of their perfect world. Every morning, Noel and Jordan had breakfast at a quiet cafe by the water. She ordered fresh fruit and black coffee. He read the newspaper like a man with nothing to fear. In the afternoons, they walked along the shore, their hands brushing, their voices soft. They blended in with the tourists, two lovers caught in the romance of an island escape. But this wasn't an escape. It was a graveyard of lies, and Darius was standing at the edge, waiting to bury them in it. On the third night, he picked up his phone, dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It rang twice before Jordan answered, his voice easy, unbothered, like the past had never touched him. "Yo, my guy, been a minute. How you been?" Darius clenched his jaw, his grip on the phone tightening. He forced his voice to stay level. "Yeah, it's been a while. Where you at these days?" A slight pause, just a second too long. "Man, I've been out in Berlin. Business has been crazy. You know how it is." Berlin. Darius glanced across the street, watched as Jordan laughed at something Noel whispered in his ear, watched as he wrapped an arm around her waist like he belonged there. Berlin. The lie sat between them, thick, undeniable. Darius exhaled slowly, steadying the storm building inside him. "Damn, that's far. Thought maybe you were somewhere tropical. Vacation or something." Jordan chuckled, easy, effortless. "Wish? Man, work keeps me locked in. Maybe one day. Maybe one day." Darius ended the call without another word. There was nothing left to say. Jordan had lied so easily, so smoothly, like deception was second nature, like he had spent the past 7 years perfecting it. And Noel, she had perfected something even worse. She had erased him, erased Ava, erased the life she had promised to build with him. And for what? For this. Darius didn't go after them immediately. He let the rage settle, let it sharpen into something controlled. He followed them one last time, tracking their movements, memorizing their patterns. And when he saw the private villa where they were staying, luxury, secluded, untouched by the world, he made his decision. That night, he walked into town. The tourist streets were alive with color and sound, a world too bright for the darkness in his chest. He passed the souvenir shops, the street vendors, the couples laughing over candlelit dinners. And then he stopped. A small weapons shop, hidden in plain sight. Inside, tourists bought pocket knives, decorative blades, things that would sit on a shelf and never be used. Darius wasn't a tourist. He paid in cash. No questions were asked. The metal was cold in his hands. Heavy. A tool. A decision made real. For 7 years, they had taken everything from him. Now, it was time to take something back. Some betrayals happen in an instant, a single mistake, a moment of weakness. Others are built over time, layer by layer, lie by lie. Noel Carter's betrayal wasn't a moment. It was a construction, a blueprint drawn in deception, executed with precision. But no structure lasts forever, and now Darius Montgomery was ready to tear it down. The invitation was simple, a text from a number she didn't recognize. Meet me at the Grand Mariner Hotel, room 207. Now. No name, no details, just instructions. And she came. She wasn't cautious, wasn't looking over her shoulder, because people who bury the past never expect it to rise. When Noel stepped inside, she was still in the skin of her new life. Light sundress, sunglasses perched on her head, the faint scent of tropical air still clinging to her. And then she saw him. For a second, she didn't move, didn't breathe. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes, wide, dark, unblinking, flicked to the door, to the window, to anything but the man standing in front of her. Darius didn't speak. He let the silence crush her first. Finally, she swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. Darius! His jaw clenched. The sound of her voice, after all these years, after everything, sent something shot through his chest. But he didn't let it show. He tilted his head slightly, voice calm, too calm. Noel, long time. She took a step back, bumping into the door. Her fingers twitched at her sides, like she was debating a lie, reaching for something to say, but there was nothing left to grab onto. He let her struggle, let her search for words that wouldn't come. Then, finally, he spoke. How? She shook her head slightly, eyes darting, voice thin. I don't. Darius cut her off. Don't lie to me. Her breath hitched. She blinked fast, her throat working against itself. And then, like something caving in, she exhaled. Her voice came out small, weak. It was Jordan. The name hit like a slap, like confirmation of something he already knew but never wanted to hear. Noel swallowed again, her hands clenching into fists, like she hated saying it out loud, like it made it real. Jordan set it up. The corpse in the car, the missing DNA, the ring, the necklace, every detail, down to the last ember of ash. And she let it happen. Darius stared at her. For 7 years, he had built theories in his mind, tried to make sense of the impossible. And now, hearing it from her own lips, it still didn't feel real. Why? Noel closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, something shifted. Less fear, more resignation. I wanted out. Out! Like their life was something to escape from. Like their daughter was a cage. Like Darius was a mistake she had been waiting to erase. He let the words settle, let the weight of them press down, suffocating, unforgivable. And Jordan, her lips trembled. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, she whispered. But we were already. Darius let out a slow, bitter laugh. Of course. She and Jordan hadn't just run away together. They had started before the accident. Before the lie, before she let him bury an empty coffin and raise a daughter who never got to say goodbye. Noel flinched at the sound of his laugh, at the sheer brokenness of it. Darius stepped forward, voice lower now, more dangerous. You let me grieve you for 7 years. She shook her head fast, eyes wet, desperate. Darius, you let Ava grow up motherless. Her face twisted, like regret, like guilt, like something too little, too late. He could see the words forming on her lips, could feel the apology coming before it ever left her mouth. But he didn't want it. He would never want it. Darius stared at her, the woman he had loved, The woman he had buried. The woman who had never been dead to begin with. And now, there was only one thing left to do. There are betrayals that cut deep, wounds that never close, lies that rewrite a man's life in ways he can never undo. And then, there are betrayals that demand blood. Darius Montgomery wasn't a violent man. He had spent his whole life following logic, structure, discipline. But logic had died 7 years ago, and now all that was left was justice. Noelle sat frozen, her body tense, her breath shallow. Darius reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, held it up so she could see. Call him. Her lips trembled. Her fingers flexed against the fabric of her dress, like she wanted to refuse, like she wanted to run. Darius tilted his head, voice like stone. Now! Noelle swallowed hard, reached for her phone with shaking hands, pressed the number she had dialed countless times before. Yo, baby, what's up? You good? Noelle's voice cracked, thin as paper. Come to room 207. Now. Damn, that urgent? I was just about to. Just come. Darius didn't move. Noelle's breath was uneven, her shoulders tight, her eyes darting between him and the door. Minutes stretched, heavy, suffocating. Then, 3 knocks. Noelle flinched. Darius didn't. He nodded toward the door. Open it. He was all confidence. Loose button-down, designer watch glinting under the light. He had the ease of a man who thought he owned the world. Damn, babe, what got you so? His words died the second he saw Darius. His eyes flicked to Noelle, to the tension in her shoulders, the stiffness in her stance. Then, finally, to the gun in Darius's hand. Jordan didn't move, didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes shifted. Darius watched it happen, the calculation, the way Jordan's mind was already working through the exits, the lies, the chances of walking out of here alive. He always had a way out, always had a plan. Not this time. Darius exhaled, tilted his head slightly. How long? A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Man, come on. How long? Jordan. Jordan let out a breath, rubbing a hand over his jaw. He glanced at Noelle, then back at Darius. And then, finally, he let the mask slip. 7 months before the accident. Darius didn't blink. He already knew. He had known the second he saw them on that beach, moving together like second nature. But hearing Jordan say it burned. Jordan's voice stayed even, like none of it mattered. Look, man, things happen. You were always so locked in, so focused on the grind, on the job, on everything but her. Noelle tensed, eyes flicking to Darius, but he didn't acknowledge her. His stare stayed locked on the man who had rewritten his life with a lie. Jordan spread his hands, easy, like he was explaining something simple. She wanted out. I gave her a way out. You can be mad about it, but at the end of the day... Darius lifted the gun. Jordan stilled. For the first time, the ease cracked. For the first time, there was fear. Darius stared at him. 7 years of grief, of suffering, of nights spent suffocating under the weight of a lie. 7 years of his daughter growing up motherless. 7 years of silence, pain, emptiness. And the man responsible stood right in front of him. Jordan's lips parted, his hands barely lifting. Darius pulled the trigger. Gunshot, a sharp inhale, a staggered step back. Jordan's hand shot to his chest, his white shirt blooming red, his knees buckling. A second shot. He collapsed. A final exhale. Then nothing. Darius stood over him. No anger, no satisfaction, just an emptiness that stretched across every inch of his body. For 7 years, he had carried a grief that wasn't real. Now, the grief was real, because now there were bodies. Now there was blood. And Noelle Carter was next. The room was silent. Noelle stood frozen. Her lips trembled. her eyes wide, locked on the body of the man she had chosen over the life she left behind. Jordan Ellis wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't talking his way out of this one. He was gone. Darius Montgomery stood over him. The gun was still warm in his hands. His heartbeat was steady, too steady. No rage, no relief, no victory. Just silence. 7 years of grief, of loss, of suffering, wiped away in 2 gunshots. And yet the weight in his chest remained. Noelle's voice was small, barely there. "Darius, please." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. She had made her choice years ago, had rewritten his life into a nightmare, taken away a father from his daughter, stolen the years he would never get back. And now she wanted mercy. Darius raised a gun. Noelle flinched, hands coming up, tears slipping down her face. Maybe she was sorry. Maybe she wasn't. It didn't matter now. Because it was over. Darius lowered the gun. Not because she deserved to live, but because she had already lost. He pressed a button on his phone, lifted it to his ear. A calm, flat voice answered on the other end. 911, what's your emergency? Darius inhaled, let the air settle in his lungs, then exhaled, slow, steady. Send the police to the Grand Mariner Hotel, room 207. There's been a murder. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The story spread like wildfire. A man who had buried his wife, only to find her alive with his best friend. A staged death. A betrayal that had unraveled in the most violent way possible. Some called it justice. Others called it revenge. The prosecution painted him as a man consumed by rage, a cold-blooded killer who had planned an execution the moment he pulled the trigger. The defense argued something different, that this wasn't just a crime. This was a psychological war, a torment no man should endure. They called it temporary insanity, the breaking point of a man who had already suffered too much. But in the end, the law doesn't make exceptions for broken men. December 14th, 2023. The verdict came down in a packed courtroom. Darius Montgomery, guilty of second-degree murder. Sentenced to 35 years to life. His mother, Angela Montgomery, broke down the second she heard the words. She had already lost her husband to the streets. Now, she was losing her son to a prison cell. But the real heartbreak sat in the front row. Ava, 10 years old, too young to understand all of it, but old enough to know her father wasn't coming home. Not for a long time. Darius Montgomery never spoke at the trial, never asked for mercy, never begged for understanding, because he had already accepted his fate. 7 years ago, they had taken his life from him, and now he had taken theirs. Some would say it was justice. Some would say it was revenge. But the real question is, if it were you, if the person you love more than anything faked their death, erased your life, stole your future, would you have done the same? Or would you have walked away? Tell us in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And sometimes betrayal leaves nothing behind but blood.